Deep in the Montana mountains, amidst a storm powerful enough to claim a life, Hunter Blake opened his door to discover a freezing German Shepherd puppy. Yet, the dog refused to enter the cozy cabin. It remained outside, shivering in the snow, intent on guiding him back into the shadowed forest. It was then that Hunter noticed the collar. Entangled in its buckle was a torn, blood-stained sliver of red flannel, the very same material as Hunter's shirt. "Keep going." It was a silent plea for aid from an unknown person who seemed to embody his own spirit. What he discovered at the base of the cliff was not merely wreckage, but a specter from his past awaiting rescue. Please support our channel by subscribing to witness this extraordinary journey unfold. The radio on the kitchen counter hissed with static, fading in and out as the announcer detailed the approaching weather system. They dubbed it the blizzard of the decade, a monstrous white force descending from the Canadian border to engulf Montana entirely. However, here in the high country, 10 miles from the nearest paved road and a lifetime removed from civilization, Hunter Blake simply referred to it as winter. Hunter stood by the robust oak window frame, observing the initial aggressive onslaught of snow battering the glass. The wind shrieked through the valley, a lamentable sound that conjured memories he desperately sought to suppress. He took a sip of his black coffee, the ceramic mug providing warmth against his hardened hands. At 60 years old, Hunter was a man defined by sharp features and unyielding determination. His face bore the marks of the elements, etched with the profound lines that result from prolonged squinting against the sun or peering through a rifle's scope. He turned from the window, surveying his cabin. Everything was meticulously arranged. The firewood beside the cast-iron stove was stacked with military-grade precision. The canned goods were sorted by their expiration dates. The quiet within the room was substantial, yet it was a familiar burden. Hunter donned his preferred attire for the harsh winter months, a gray thermal undershirt beneath a heavy red and black plaid flannel shirt. The flannel was worn thin at the elbows and frayed at the cuffs, a garment that had seen better days but still offered superior warmth compared to anything new. He kept the buttons undone, a remnant of his past habit of needing immediate access to any tool or weapon he might carry, though nowadays it was usually just a pocket knife. The wind's intensity escalated, rattling the house's timber frame. A sudden, sharp sound cut through the storm's roar. It was not the clatter of a loose shutter or the creak of a settling beam. It was an organic, high-pitched cry of desperation. Hunter set his coffee mug down on the table. He tilted his head, his instincts as a former Marine Scout sniper surfacing, despite the decades that had dulled them. He listened. There it was again, a whine followed by a scraping noise at the base of the front door. Hunter traversed the room in 3 swift strides. He was not expecting visitors. No one ventured this high in November, certainly not during a storm warning. He unlocked the sturdy deadbolt and grasped the iron handle. Bracing his shoulder against the wood, he pulled. The wind immediately assailed him, driving stinging ice shards into his eyes. He looked out into the swirling white immensity, initially discerning only the storm. Then he looked down. Huddled in the corner of the porch, pressed against the doorframe as if attempting to meld with the wood, was a puppy. It was a German Shepherd, but its coat possessed a rare hue, a shimmering silver sable that made the animal appear spectral against the snow. The dog could not have been older than 5 months. It shivered so intensely that its teeth chattered audibly over the wind. "Hey there, little one," Hunter said, his voice a rough rasp. He reached down, intending to lift the animal. The puppy flinched, but did not retreat. It looked up at him with eyes that conveyed an alarming degree of intelligence and fear. As Hunter moved closer, he observed the physical toll the journey had exacted upon the creature. The dog panted heavily, its tongue lolling to the side, dripping moisture onto the frozen deck. Hunter knew that dogs primarily sweat through their paws and mouths, and this level of distress indicated the animal had been running for an extended period. "Come on, let us get you inside," Hunter murmured, extending a hand. He noticed the pause. The pads were raw and bleeding, lacerated by sharp ice and hidden rocks. The sight caused Hunter's chest to tighten. This dog had endured immense hardship to reach his doorstep. However, when Hunter attempted to draw the puppy across the threshold, the animal resisted. The dog planted its sore feet and emitted a sharp, urgent bark. It pulled away from the cabin's warmth, turning its head back towards the tree line, where the forest stood like a wall of black ink against the white expanse. Hunter frowned. He knelt on one knee, unconcerned by the snow soaking into his denim jeans. He placed a reassuring hand on the dog's neck to steady it. Quote 1. Hunter inquired. The dog whined, a long, low sound that vibrated against Hunter's palm. It looked at Hunter, then back towards the dark woods, then at Hunter once more. The message was unequivocal. Hunter moved his hand to check for a collar. His fingers brushed against the wet fur, detecting the animal's rapid heartbeat. There was a simple leather collar, devoid of any metal tag or name, but something was caught in its buckle. Hunter leaned in closer, peering through the dim porch light. Snagged firmly in the collar's metal clasp was a piece of fabric. It appeared to have been torn forcefully, its edges ragged and uneven. He carefully disentangled the scrap of cloth. It was damp and cold. He held it up to the light. It was a piece of red and black plaid flannel. Hunter regarded the fabric in his hand. Then slowly, he looked down at his own chest. The pattern on the torn piece was nearly identical to the shirt he was wearing. It was the type of shirt purchased at the general store in town, favored by locals, workers, and those familiar with this mountain. He looked back at the dog. The puppy observed him with an intensity that felt almost human. The animal was not a stray seeking sustenance. It was not lost. It had arrived with a distinct purpose. Hunter rubbed the damp fabric between his thumb and forefinger. He felt a stiffness in the material that was not solely due to the freezing moisture. He brought it closer to his nose. Beneath the scent of wet wool and pine needles, there was the metallic, coppery aroma of blood. The realization struck Hunter with physical force. Someone was out there, someone wearing a shirt just like his. They were injured, lost in a storm that was sufficiently frigid to kill a grown man within an hour, let alone a child or someone already wounded. This dog was their only lifeline. Hunter looked at the silver puppy. "You are not just a dog, are you?" he whispered. "You are a messenger." The puppy issued a single sharp bark and took a limping step towards the stairs, looking back as if to confirm Hunter was following. Hunter rose. The warmth of the fire within the cabin beckoned him. His coffee remained steaming on the table. He could close the door, feed the dog, and rationalize that there was nothing he could do until the storm subsided. That would be the pragmatic course of action. That would be the sensible choice for a retired man with aching knees and a weary heart. However, Hunter Blake glanced at the red flannel in his hand, and then at the fading red flannel on his own arm. It felt akin to looking in a mirror. He turned and re-entered the cabin. He did not close the door. He moved with a swiftness that belied his age. He went to the closet and retrieved his heavy leather coat, the one lined with sheepskin. He sat on the bench and laced up his insulated combat boots, pulling the laces taut with practiced efficiency. He collected the substantial medical kit from the shelf, the one he kept fully provisioned with trauma supplies, a habit he never abandoned. After his discharge from the Marines in 1985, he checked his flashlight, confirming the batteries were fresh. He obtained a coil of climbing rope and secured it to his belt. Finally, he took a handful of dried beef jerky from a jar and tucked it into his pocket. Hunter returned to the door. The puppy was still there, shivering, waiting. "Lead the way," Hunter stated. He stepped onto the porch and pulled the heavy door shut behind him, sealing away the warmth and security. The lock clicked with a sound of finality. Hunter Blake stepped off the porch and into the knee-deep snow, following the silver dog into the heart of the storm. The instant Hunter stepped clear of the porch's shelter, the storm attempted to force him back inside. The wind was a palpable entity out here, a screaming barrier of ice and fury that buffeted his brown leather jacket and stung the exposed skin of his face. He pulled the collar high, tucking his chin against the rough sheepskin lining, and activated his heavy flashlight. The beam carved a pale conical path through the swirling white chaos, illuminating a world reshaped and overwritten by the blizzard. Hunter looked down. The silver shepherd puppy, Echo, had attempted to bound forward into the snowdrifts, propelled by an anxious drive to return to its origin. However, the snow was already knee-deep, and the animal was small, injured, and fatigued. After merely a few yards, Echo faltered, its front legs buckling under the weight of the drifts and the agony of its lacerated paws. It emitted a sharp, frustrated yelp that was almost immediately lost to the gale. Quote 2. Hunter said, his voice amplified to surmount the wind. He moved to the dog's side. Hunter realized instantly that the puppy could not break the trail. If Echo attempted to lead through this powder, it would succumb to hypothermia or cardiac arrest within 20 minutes. The heart was willing, but the body was failing. Hunter knelt, using his own broad back to shield the dog from the wind. "Listen to me," he said, gazing into the animal's wide, golden eyes. Quote 4. It was an absurd thing to say to a dog, yet Echo seemed to hesitate, his ears flattening against his head. He looked at Hunter, then leaned his weight against Hunter's leg. Hunter stood, his joints popping in the cold. He hadn't tracked a quarry in conditions like these since a training exercise in Norway back in 1983. But the skills weren't gone. They were merely dormant, buried beneath years of solitude and firewood chopping. Now they surged to the surface, sharp and demanding. He swept the flashlight beam across the ground. The tracks Echo had made coming to the cabin were already being obscured, their edges softening and vanishing under the relentless snowfall. If they waited another 10 minutes, the trail would be lost forever. Hunter focused. He wasn't searching for the obvious depressions in the snow, which were unreliable in high winds. He was searching for color, for the microscopic anomalies that didn't belong in a monochrome world of white and gray. There, about 5 feet away, barely visible near the base of a shivering pine sapling, was a speck. To an untrained eye, it might have appeared as a shadow or a piece of bark. To Hunter Blake, it was a beacon. He stepped forward, shining the light directly upon it. It was a single drop of blood, instantly frozen into a crimson jewel against the ice. "Got you," Hunter whispered. He moved forward, his gait shifting from the casual stride of a homeowner to the predatory, calculated pace of a hunter. He kept his center of gravity low, his eyes methodically scanning the ground. He found another drop 30 yards later, then a smear on a low-hanging branch where the dog must have brushed against the bark. The trail was faint, a breadcrumb path of pain leading back into the darkness. As Hunter moved, he anticipated the puppy scrambling ahead or lagging behind. But what happened next made the hairs on the back of Hunter's neck stand on end. Echo moved to Hunter's left side and remained there. The puppy didn't run. He didn't weave. He fell into a perfect heel position, his shoulder aligned with Hunter's knee, matching the man's pace, step for step. When Hunter slowed to examine a potential track, Echo stopped and sat. When Hunter moved, Echo moved. This was not the behavior of a stray or a wild farm dog. This was discipline. This was training. Someone had dedicated hours, perhaps weeks, to teaching this 5-month-old creature to walk by their side with absolute trust. The realization added a new layer of tragedy to the night. The person out there in the dark had loved this dog enough to impart manners, enough to forge a bond that even panic couldn't break. They pushed deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser here, ancient pines that partially blocked the wind but created deep, treacherous shadows. The temperature was dropping. Hunter could feel the cold seeping through his denim jeans, gnawing at his knees. He checked his compass, though he already knew the direction. They were heading northwest, gaining elevation. The blood trail was becoming more challenging to locate. The snow was falling faster now, thick, wet flakes that clung to everything. Hunter had to rely on more subtle signs, a broken twig, a disturbed patch of snow where a body might have rested. The faint metallic scent of copper that only a focused mind could isolate in the clean mountain air. Suddenly, Hunter stopped. The flashlight beam illuminated a fork in the game trail they were following. To the left, the path widened and led toward the old logging road. To the right, the ground rose sharply into a tangle of deadfall and rocks. Hunter's instinct urged him left. A vehicle or a person on foot would naturally opt for the wider, flatter path. He pivoted his body toward the logging road. A low, urgent whine rose from his left side. Hunter looked down. Echo had not turned with him. The puppy stood still, facing the steep, rocky incline to the right. He looked at Hunter, then threw his head back and emitted a single sharp sound, halfway between a bark and a cry. "You think they went up there?" Hunter asked, shining his light up the treacherous slope. "It makes no sense. There's nothing up there but the ridge." Echo did not budge. He took 2 steps up the rocky path, then turned and looked at Hunter, his body tense, his tail low. He whined again, louder this time, a sound filled with frustration. Hunter hesitated. In the Marines, you trusted your map and your intelligence, but out here in the wilderness, you trusted the creature with superior senses. This dog could hear things Hunter couldn't. He could smell fear and blood on the wind. Hunter exhaled, a cloud of steam vanishing instantly. Quote 2. He turned right, following the dog. The climb was brutal. The snow here was slick over loose shale, and Hunter's boots struggled for traction. He had to use his free hand to grasp tree roots and rocks to haul himself upward. Echo scrambled beside him, slipping and sliding, panting heavily, but refusing to stop. After 20 minutes of grueling ascent, the trees began to thin. The wind returned with a vengeance, screaming across the open ground with enough force to make Hunter stagger. They had reached the upper ridge. Hunter knew this place. The locals called it Dead Man's Drop, a notorious stretch of the mountain where the old service road curved sharply around a sheer limestone cliff. There was no guardrail, just a deceptive shoulder of soft dirt that crumbled away into a 300-foot abyss. Hunter slowed, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from exertion, but from dread. He swept the light across the ground. The snow here was churned, violent, and chaotic. Not the smooth blanket of the storm, but scarred. He saw the tracks, wide, deep ruts cut into the snow and the frozen mud beneath. Tire tracks. They came from the direction of the main road, erratic and swerving. Hunter could read the story etched in the earth. The driver had hit a patch of black ice, overcorrected, and lost control. The skid marks were long and desperate. They tore through a cluster of saplings, snapping them like dry matchsticks. Hunter followed them with his light, his stomach dropping as the tracks led closer and closer to the edge. Echo let out a sound that tore through Hunter's heart. A long, mournful howl that sounded like a child crying. The dog ran forward, ignoring the pain in his paws, and stopped mere inches from the precipice. Hunter rushed forward, grabbing the back of the dog's neck to keep him from falling. Quote 3. He commanded, pulling the animal back to safety. Hunter got down on his stomach and crawled to the edge of the cliff, shining his flashlight down into the darkness. The beam was swallowed by the void, the falling snow too weak to reach the bottom. But he didn't need to see the bottom to know what had happened. The tire tracks hadn't turned. They hadn't stopped. They cut straight through the snowbank at the edge of the road and disappeared into empty space. The tops of the pine trees protruding from the abyss below were sheared off, broken branches resting on the snow like severed limbs. There was no explosion, no fire, no smoke, just a terrifying heavy silence rising from the dark valley below. Hunter pulled himself back from the edge and sat up, breathing hard. The wind roared in his ears, but all he could hear was the silence of the grave. Echo was pacing frantically back and forth along the cliff's edge, whining, sniffing the air and looking down. The puppy knew his person was down there. Hunter looked at the dog, then at the impossible descent. He thought of his warm cabin, his coffee, his safe, solitary life. He thought of the phone lines that were likely down and the sheriff's station 20 miles away over unplowable roads. By the time help arrived, whoever was in that truck would be a collection of frozen statues. Hunter Blake stood up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the coil of climbing rope. He looked at Echo. "Hot," Hunter said, his voice steady, devoid of the fear churning in his gut. He walked to the nearest sturdy pine tree, testing its trunk with a gloved hand. It was solid. He began to tie a knot, his fingers moving with the muscle memory of a man who had once rappelled out of helicopters in 1989. The trail of blood had ended, but the mission had just begun. Hunter looped the climbing rope around the trunk of an ancient ponderosa pine, pulling it taut with a force that turned his knuckles white. He tested the tension, leaning his full weight back against the line. The tree held. It had stood on this ridge since before the First World War and would not yield tonight. Quote, Hunter shouted over the wind to the silver shepherd. He turned his back to the drop, feeding the rope through his gloved hands and wrapping it around his waist for friction. He stepped off the ledge. The descent was a nightmare of shifting shale and blinding snow. Hunter's boots scrabbled for purchase on the frozen cliff face, sending showers of rocks clattering into the darkness below. The wind here was ferocious, an updraft that tried to lift him off the wall and toss him into the void. Above him, he heard the frantic scratching of claws on stone. Echo was coming. The puppy wasn't rappelling but sliding, tumbling, and scrambling down a narrow deer trail that zigzagged alongside Hunter's vertical path. Every time Hunter looked up, he saw the silver shape of the dog fighting gravity, driven by a loyalty that defied all biological logic. Hunter reached the bottom of the drop, landing in a snowdrift that came up to his waist. He unhooked the rope but left it dangling. He might require it to transport survivors back. He directed his flashlight's beam into the dense patch of trees at the base of the incline. There it was. The pickup truck was indistinguishable as a vehicle. It resembled a crushed aluminum can that a giant had stomped on. It was positioned at a 45 degrees angle, its front grille embedded in the earth with the bed angled towards the sky. It hadn't reached the bottom of the ravine. Instead, it had become ensnared in a fierce embrace between two colossal pine trees. The impact had fractured the trees' trunks, causing them to lean heavily over the wreck, holding it fast. The sharp scent of gasoline and radiator fluid sliced through the frigid air, cutting through the aroma of pine. Hunter waited amidst the deep snow, his heart pounding a frantic cadence against his ribs. Echo was already there, digging assiduously at the snow piled against the driver's side door, emitting high, piercing whimpers that sounded like pleas for assistance. Hunter reached the truck. The roof had caved in on the passenger side, flattened. Anyone seated there was gone. He moved to the driver's side. The window was missing, shattered into countless diamond-like fragments that coated the interior. He shone his light inside. A young woman was slumped over the steering wheel. She couldn't have been older than 22. Her dark hair, matted with blood, clung to her pale forehead. The steering column had collapsed, entrapping her legs, and the dashboard pressed uncomfortably close to her chest. Hunter experienced a surge of nausea, a familiar sickness he hadn't felt since his military service. He suppressed it. Reaching through the broken window, he placed 2 fingers on her neck. Her skin felt ice cold. Hunter held his breath, waiting, hoping. There, a flutter, weak, thready, and irregular, but it was a pulse. Quote, Hunter stated, his voice resonant and commanding. Quote 1. The woman remained motionless. Hunter leaned in closer, directing the light onto her torso to check for significant bleeding. That's when he noticed it. She was wearing a red and black plaid flannel jacket. The fabric was torn at the shoulder, revealing the white batting underneath, stained crimson. It was the same pattern as the fragment discovered on Echo collar. It was the same pattern as the shirt Hunter wore beneath his leather jacket. Hunter unzipped his leather coat, exposing his own red flannel shirt, an instinctive urge to shield her with his body heat. As he moved, the woman stirred. A low moan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, crusted with snow and blood, then slowly opened. Her eyes were unfocused, glassy with shock and hypothermia. She looked around wildly, panic seizing her as consciousness returned. Hey, look at me," Hunter said, his voice softening. "I'm here. I've got you." Her eyes met his face. She blinked, attempting to comprehend the bearded, weathered man looming out of the storm. Then her gaze dropped to his chest. She saw the red flannel. A transformation occurred on her face. The panic didn't disappear, but it shifted. Her breathing hitched. She stared at the plaid pattern on his chest as if it were a beacon in a dark ocean. It was familiar. It represented her people, the mountain, her family. She exhaled a ragged breath, a sound that might have been a word, but her lips were too frozen to form distinct shapes. She raised her right hand, her fingers trembling violently, and reached out. Hunter grasped her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, the desperate clench of someone drowning. She squeezed his hand, her eyes locking onto his with an intense, burning gaze. She was no longer looking at a stranger. She was looking at a savior, someone who wore the same colors, someone who belonged. Quote 4. Hunter lied. He knew she wouldn't be. The crush injuries were severe. Her breathing was shallow, punctuated by wet rattles that suggested a punctured lung. "Stay with me." The woman shook her head slightly. She squeezed his hand harder, her nails digging into his palm. She was trying to convey something. She tugged at his hand, attempting to draw his attention away from her. Her eyes darted frantically to the rearview mirror, then shifted to look over her shoulder towards the rear of the cab. Hunter followed her gaze. The rear window of the truck cab was shattered, but unlike the side windows, which had disintegrated from the impact, the rear window appeared to have been broken from the inside out. Jagged shards of glass protruded outward, and the snow on the trunk of the fallen tree behind the cab was disturbed. Hunter looked back at the woman. Her eyes were wide, pleading, filled with a terror unrelated to her own pain. She mouthed a word again. This time, Hunter deciphered the shape of her lips. "Boy!" Hunter froze. He shone the light into the back seat. It was empty. A child's car seat lay there, unbuckled and vacant. A small backpack rested on the floorboard, its contents spilled. Quote 1, Hunter asked, his voice taut. The woman emitted a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She released Hunter's hand and pointed a trembling finger towards the broken rear window, then towards the darkness of the woods beyond. The realization struck Hunter with the force of a physical blow. The child wasn't in the wreckage. He had survived the crash, panicked, broken the window, and crawled out. He was out there alone in a blizzard. Hunter looked at the woman's face again. The life was receding from her eyes, replaced by a gray haze. But the desperation remained. She was begging him. Suddenly the wrecked truck dissolved. The snow vanished. Hunter was no longer in Montana. He was back in the humid, stifling heat of a foreign land decades ago. The year was 1983. The scent of pine was replaced by the smell of burning rubber and cordite. He was holding Private Danny Miller. Danny was 19 years old, a kid from Iowa who loved baseball and wrote letters to his mother every Sunday. Danny had sustained a shrapnel wound to the chest during a mortar attack. Hunter had dragged him behind a crumbling wall, pressing his hands against the wound, trying to contain the blood within the boy's body. Danny had looked up at him with that same terrifying clarity. He had gripped Hunter's hand just as this woman was doing. Danny had been wearing his green fatigues, soaked dark with blood. Hunter was wearing the same green. They were brothers in arms, bound by the same uniform, the same mud, the same fear. "Don't leave me, Sarge," Danny had whispered, his voice bubbling. "It's cold." Hunter had held him as the light faded from his eyes. He had felt the precise moment the soul departed the body, leaving behind only a heavy, empty shell. He had failed. He had been strong. He had been trained. He had been a Marine, but he couldn't stop death. The memory washed over him, submerging him in ancient grief. The sound of the wind outside transformed into the roar of artillery. A sharp, wet bark snapped him back to the present. Echo had climbed into the cab and was licking the woman's face, whining softly. Hunter blinked, the snowy woods of Montana rushing back into focus. He looked down at the woman, Sarah. He didn't know her name yet, but in his heart, she was already Sarah. She was Danny Miller all over again, dying in the cold, asking for help he couldn't provide. But this time was different. Danny had asked him to stay. Sarah was asking him to go. She weakly but firmly pushed his hand away. She gestured towards the broken window again. Quote zone. Her eyes screamed. Quote 1. Hunter looked at her. He knew that if he left her, she would die alone. But he also knew that if he stayed, the boy would die too. Sarah was already gone. Her body just hadn't accepted it yet. She was expending her final conscious moments, not praying for herself, but bargaining for the child's life. Hunter clasped her hand one last time. He leaned in close, his face inches from hers. I will find him, Hunter vowed, his voice breaking with the weight of the promise. I swear to you, I will bring him back. Sarah exhaled, a long, shuddering release of breath. Her eyes softened. She looked at his red flannel shirt one final time, and a faint, ghostly shadow of a smile touched her lips. She closed her eyes. Hunter pulled away. He felt as though he were tearing out his own heart, leaving her there in the freezing darkness. But the mission had shifted. It was no longer a rescue. It was a hunt. He turned towards the broken rear window. He shone his light onto the snow outside. There, almost obscured by the fresh drift, was a single small footprint. It was a sneaker print, impossibly small. Hunter looked at Echo. Find him, he commanded. The silver shepherd leaped through the broken window, vanishing into the night. Hunter followed, leaving the dead to watch over the dying, plunging into the abyss to save the living. The world outside the shattered truck cab was a void of swirling white violence. Hunter Blake stepped away from the wreckage, leaving the dying woman behind, his heart heavy with a guilt that felt physically crushing. He forced himself to look down, focusing his flashlight beam on the single small footprint Echo had located. It was a sneaker print, likely a size 12 or 13 for a child. It was already half filled with fresh powder. Had he arrived 5 minutes later, the mountain would have erased the boy completely. Hunter moved. He did not run. Running in deep snow was a waste of energy that led to mistakes. He moved with a rhythmic sliding gait, lifting his knees high and planting his boots firmly to test the ground beneath the drift. Echo was ahead of him, no longer healing, but working the scent cone. The silver shepherd plunged through the snow like a dolphin breaking waves, his nose skimming the surface, sneezing occasionally to clear ice from his nostrils. The trail led away from the road and up a steep incline toward a jagged spine of limestone rocks. It was a nonsensical direction for survival. Instinct ought to have guided the child down the slope, away from the wind's onslaught. Yet Hunter understood that severe trauma could warp rational responses. The youngster was likely in a state of shock, utterly disoriented, and relying on the most basic survival instinct: to conceal himself. Hunter pressed onward, the biting cold seeping through his denim trousers. The wind here was a savage force, shrieking through the apertures in the rocky terrain, with a sound disturbingly akin to human lamentation. Periodically, Hunter would pause, straining to catch any sound, a cry, a shout, anything indicative of human presence. But only the wind's howl filled the silence. Echo halted abruptly some 50 yards ahead. The canine stood before a narrow fissure in the rock face, a dark, jagged opening in the stone resembling a wound. The aperture was diminutive, barely wide enough to admit a man's shoulders. Echo emitted a sharp, insistent bark, then crouched low, disappearing into the darkness. Hunter scrambled up the final few feet of the incline, his breath catching harshly in his throat. He dropped to his knees in the snow at the crevice's edge. He directed his flashlight beam into the opening. The fissure extended about 6 feet deep, a natural cavity formed by rockfalls centuries prior. It was dry within, shielded from the blizzard's direct assault. Deep inside the cavity, a small, compact ball resembling a discarded pile of clothing was the boy. He was clad in jeans and a thin superhero t-shirt. One shoe was missing. His skin bore a terrifying pale blue-gray hue, and he was not shivering. This was an ominous sign. Shivering indicated the body's struggle. The cessation of shivering signified surrender. Echo was already engaged in his task. The pup had positioned himself between the boy and the cold stone wall, pressing the entirety of his warm, furry body against the child's small frame. The dog was licking the boy's face with urgency, his coarse tongue rasping against the frozen skin, attempting to stimulate circulation, attempting to rouse him. Hunter gazed at the child, and for a dreadful, paralyzing instant, the present reality fractured. The flashlight beam trembled in his grasp. The cave's rocky walls dissolved, replaced by the sodden, crumbling bricks of a bunker in Beirut. The howling wind morphed into the distant thunder of mortar fire. The scent of pine and snow vanished, superseded by the metallic tang of copper and damp earth. Hunter was not observing a stranger child in Montana. He was looking at Private Danny Miller. It was 1983. Rain lashed down relentlessly, cold and unforgiving. Danny lay in the mud, his chest grievously wounded. He, too, had stopped shivering. His lips were the same chilling shade of blue. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing, glazing over as his life ebbed away. Quote. Danny had whispered. Quote. 1. Hunter had held him. He had draped his poncho over the boy, but it was insufficient. He had rubbed Danny's hands, imploring him to stay, begging for any sliver of mercy in the universe to spare this child, who had a baseball scholarship awaiting him in Iowa. But the cold had prevailed. The war had won. Hunter remained there for hours, cradling a corpse, awaiting a medevac that arrived too late. The weight of that night had shadowed Hunter for 40 years. It sat with him at his kitchen table each morning. It accompanied him on his woodland treks. It was the reason he lived in solitude, why he erected fences, why he kept the world at bay. He had failed to safeguard the one thing that truly mattered. A low, guttural whine from Echo jolted Hunter back from the precipice of despair. The dog glanced back at Hunter, his golden eyes conveying a silent plea. He nuzzled the boy's lifeless hand with his damp nose, then looked back at Hunter as if to implore. Quote. Hunter blinked, tears freezing on his eyelashes. He shook his head vigorously, dispelling the spectral images of 1983. He was not in Beirut. He was in Montana, and this boy was not dead. Not yet. Quote 1. Hunter declared, his voice rough and strained in the frigid air. Quote 2. He thrust the flashlight into the snow, angling the beam to illuminate the cave. He unzipped his heavy brown leather jacket. The frigid air struck his chest like a hammer blow, penetrating the red flannel shirt. But he paid it no mind. He removed the substantial sheepskin-lined coat from his shoulders. Hunter crawled into the confined space. It was a tight fit, the rock scraping against his back. He reached out and grasped the boy. The child was rigid, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. Hunter pulled him close, positioning him away from the cold wall. Quote 3. Hunter whispered. Quote 4. He wrapped the heavy leather jacket around the boy, pressing the sheepskin lining against the child's freezing skin. He swaddled him like an infant, covering all but his face. Hunter drew the boy against his own chest, pressing him against the red flannel shirt. He enveloped him with his powerful arms, sharing every particle of residual body heat. He rocked back and forth gently, a primordial instinct to generate warmth. Echo, recognizing his role as the heat source was being supplanted, moved to the cave's entrance. The dog lay down across the opening, his body acting as a living draft excluder, preventing the wind from reaching them. He kept his gaze fixed on Hunter and the boy, vigilant and unwavering. Hunter firmly rubbed the boy's back through the thick leather. "Wake up," he commanded softly. "You have to wake up. Your sister is waiting for you." He did not know if Sarah was still alive down by the truck, but he needed the falsehood. He needed the boy to have a reason to fight. Minutes elapsed. They felt like hours. Hunter could feel the cold permeating his own bones, numbing his fingers, but he maintained his hold. He thought of Danny Miller. He thought of the letter he had penned to Danny's mother. A letter that felt like a fabrication because it did not convey. Quote 7. Then he felt it. A faint tremor coursed through the boy's body. It was subtle at first, merely a twitch. Then came another, followed by a shudder. The boy gasped, a ragged, shallow inhalation that sounded painful. His eyelids fluttered. "That's it," Hunter encouraged, rubbing the boy's arms more vigorously. Quote 1. The boy's eyes opened. They were dark, bewildered, and terrified. He looked up at Hunter, his vision swimming. He saw the rugged beard, the intense gaze, and the red and black plaid of the shirt pressed against his cheek. He did not speak. He did not cry. He simply stared at the red flannel, his small hand venturing out from the leather bundle to clutch the fabric. Hunter felt the child's small fingers grip his shirt. The sensation was electrifying. It was the polar opposite of the feeling of Danny's hand growing limp. This was a grip of life. "I'm Hunter," the old man said, his voice thick with emotion. "And that dog guarding the entrance is Echo. We're going to get you out of here." The boy blinked slowly, then buried his face in Hunter's chest. He began to shiver violently now. Great convulsive tremors of cold shook his entire frame. Hunter welcomed the shivering. It was the most beautiful sensation he had ever experienced. It was the warmth of life resisting the winter. Hunter looked at Echo. The dog was lightly dusted with snow, shivering slightly himself, but he had not budged from his post. Quote 4. Hunter whispered to the dog. Quote 5. Hunter knew they could not remain there. The cave offered shelter, but not rescue. The mother was either succumbing or deceased down at the truck. The storm was intensifying, but for this single moment in this small crevice of the mountain, death had been held at bay. Hunter tightened his embrace on the child. He had spent 40 years attempting to erase the past. Tonight, he would utilize it. He would employ every lesson, every failure, every ounce of his pain to ensure this narrative had a different conclusion. He gathered the boy into his arms, adjusting the heavy leather coat to ensure no skin remained exposed. He prepared to re-enter the storm. He would carry this boy through hell if necessary, because this time, the soldier would be returning home with the survivor. The trek back to the wreckage was less than 200 yards. However, in the ferocity of the whiteout, it felt like traversing a continent. Hunter Blake moved blindly, cradling the bundle of leather and boy against his chest with an unyielding grip. His flashlight beam merely reflected off the wall of driving snow, creating a blinding glare that impaired his night vision. He had to rely on his feet, sensing the terrain's slope, and he had to trust the silver shadow moving near his knee. Echo remained glued to Hunter's leg, pressing his body against the man's shin with every step, physically guiding him away from unseen precipices and back toward the scent of gasoline and pine that marked the crash site. When the dark, distorted silhouette of the pickup truck finally emerged from the white void, Hunter experienced a wave of relief so profound it nearly made his knees buckle. He slid down the final few feet of the embankment, shielding the boy's head from low-hanging branches. He reached the driver's side door. Sarah was precisely where he had left her, her head resting against the headrest, her breathing shallow and terrifyingly quiet. Snow had already begun to accumulate on her shoulder where the window was missing. Hunter looked up at the cliff he had descended. It was imperceptible now, lost in the swirling chaos. Even if he were alone, ascending that icy face again under these conditions would be suicidal. Attempting it with a dying woman and a traumatized child was an impossibility. Evacuation was out of the question. The Marine Corps Winter Survival Manual was unequivocal. When you cannot move, you dig in. "We're staying here," Hunter stated aloud, his voice barely audible against the wind's roar. He gently placed Toby on the passenger side floorboard, tucking the oversized leather jacket snugly around him. Quote, Hunter worked with the frantic urgency of a man racing against death. He shrugged off his backpack and delved into its main compartment. He produced a heavy-duty reflective survival tarp, presenting an orange side and a silver side. This item was standard equipment for extensive wilderness journeys, and tonight, it represented the crucial distinction between survival and demise. Unfolding the tarp, its material snapped with explosive force in the wind, akin to a gunshot. Hunter braced himself against the gale, wrestling the robust plastic over the damaged roof of the cabin. He extended it over the shattered side window and the broken rear window, effectively sealing the vehicle's wounds. Utilizing bungee cords from his pack, he fastened the tarp to the door handles and side mirrors, stretching it taut. Subsequently, he commenced shoveling. Employing his hands and a flat piece of plastic debris salvaged from the wreck, he scooped up the heavy, wet snow and accumulated it against the truck's sides and over the tarp. His objective was to construct a snow cave, using the vehicle as its framework. The snow would serve as insulation, sealing any gaps and trapping warmth within. His hands throbbed with cold, his red flannel shirt rapidly becoming soaked with perspiration and melted snow. Nevertheless, he persisted until the cabin was enveloped in a protective white mound. Hunter maneuvered himself into the cabin through the passenger door, drawing his pack and Echo in after him. He firmly closed the door. The ensuing silence was abrupt and startling. While the wind continued to rage outside, within the insulated shell, it was reduced to a subdued, distant roar. The air inside was frigid, yet still. Hunter positioned himself in the confined rear seat area, behind where Sarah was immobilized. He lifted Toby from the floorboard and cradled him on his lap. The child still trembled, but his eyes were open, observing Hunter with a blend of apprehension and wonder. Hunter reached into his pocket and retrieved a round tin. Twisting off the lid, revealed a 3-wick beeswax survival candle. He struck a weatherproof match. The flame ignited with a scent of sulfur and honey. He lit the wicks and placed the tin on the center console, positioned safely away from combustible debris. The gentle yellow illumination filled the small space, dispelling the shadows. It highlighted the frost on the dashboard, the ashen visage of the woman in the front seat, and the wide-eyed gaze of the boy. "It's not a palace," Hunter murmured, striving to maintain a steady tone. "But it's a fort, a snow fort." He glanced at Sarah. She had shown signs of stirring at the sound of his voice. She slowly, painfully, turned her head towards the back seat. Her eyes struggled to discern clearly in the candlelight. "Toby," she wheezed, her voice barely audible. "I'm right here, Sarah," the boy whispered. His voice was rough, unused. It was the first time he had spoken. Hunter observed the tension receding from Sarah's body. She released a lengthy, shuddering sigh and closed her eyes, a faint smile gracing her lips. Lacking the strength to fully turn, she extended her right hand back between the seats, her fingers seeking. Toby reached out from the embrace of Hunter's leather jacket and clasped his sister's hand. Hunter adjusted his posture. He sat with his back against the rear of the cabin, his legs extended as much as the limited space allowed. He held Toby securely against his chest, the boy's head resting beneath Hunter's chin. The red flannel shirt Hunter wore was now warm, trapping their combined body heat. Echo, who had been pacing anxiously in the small footwell, observed the human entanglement they had formed. The silver shepherd sensed the arrangement and stepped onto the seat, curling into the available space between Sarah's shoulder and Toby's legs. The dog pressed its back against Sarah's side, offering its warmth to her injured body while resting its heavy head on Toby's knee. It let out a prolonged exhalation, closing its golden eyes. This was the formation: the protector, the survivor, the dying, and the guardian. The candle flickered, casting elongated, dancing shadows upon the tarp-covered windows. The temperature within the cabin began to rise. It was not warm, but it was no longer life-threatening. The candle, the body heat of 3 humans and a dog, and the snow's insulation were creating a microclimate conducive to survival. Hunter surveyed the group. He noted his own rough, scarred hand resting protectively on Toby's shoulder. He observed Toby's small hand gripping Sarah's fading fingers. He saw Echo's fur rising and falling with steady breaths, bridging the gap between them all. In the darkness of that buried truck, stripped of societal conventions and status, a bond was solidifying, deeper than blood. They were a pack. "Sarah," Hunter inquired softly, "are you in pain?" "No," she whispered, her voice distant and dreamy. "Not anymore." "It's warm." Hunter understood the implication. The paradox of severe hypothermia presented a sensation of warmth as bodily systems began to fail. However, glancing at the candle and the dog, he harbored hope that the warmth she perceived might be genuine. "Thank you," she breathed, "for bringing him back." Hunter swallowed the ache in his throat. "We're camping," Sarah responded, simply waiting out the storm. "The cavalry will arrive in the morning." She offered no reply. Her breathing had settled into a rhythm that was too slow. Hunter tightened his hold on Toby. The boy had ceased shivering. The warmth from the leather jacket, the flannel shirt, and the dog was taking effect. Toby remained fixated on the candle flame, entranced. Hunter leaned his head back against the cold metal of the cabin. He kept his gaze on the candle, observing the wax pool and melt. His thoughts drifted to his cabin, empty and cold, situated up the hill. He contemplated the solitary existence he had meticulously cultivated over the preceding 2 decades. It felt like an entirely different era. Here, within this crushed metal box entombed by snow, Hunter Blake was no longer solitary. He was a sentry on duty, the bulwark between this boy and the darkness. He rested his hand on Echo's head, stroking the soft fur behind the puppy's ears. The dog leaned into the touch without opening its eyes. "Get some sleep, son," Hunter whispered to Toby. "I'm on watch." The boy nodded against Hunter's chest. Gradually, overcome by terror and cold, Toby's eyes began to close. The dog's rhythmic breathing and the old soldier's steady heartbeat lulled him into a restless slumber. Hunter remained awake. He sat in the flickering golden light, listening to the wind howl outside his fortress, safeguarding the living while watching over the dying, anticipating a dawn that felt a millennium away. The storm subsided just prior to daybreak. The wind, which had assailed their makeshift fortress all night with the ferocity of a living entity, finally exhausted its fury, fading into a dense, oppressive silence. Within the buried truck cab, the beeswax candle had burned down to a pool of molten gold in the tin, its flames sputtering weakly, casting elongated, dancing shadows against the silver survival tarp. Hunter Blake had not closed his eyes. He sat rigid against the rear wall of the cab, his legs cramped, his arm numb beneath the sleeping weight of the boy. He observed the woman in the front seat. Sarah's breathing had altered. For hours, it had been a shallow, rhythmic rasp. Now it was punctuated by prolonged, distressing pauses. It was a pattern Hunter had encountered too frequently before, in muddy trenches and sterile hospital wards. It signaled the body's shutdown, the spirit releasing its final earthly bonds. The air within the cab was still and strangely warm, preserved by the snow insulation and their collective body heat. Echo, the silver shepherd, lifted his head from Toby's knee. The dog's ears swiveled forward, tuning into a frequency imperceptible to human ears. Sarah emitted a soft sigh. It was not a sound of pain, but of release. Her head, previously resting awkwardly against the frosted window pillar, tilted slightly to the side. Her eyes fluttered open one final time. In the candle's fading light, they appeared neither glassy nor fearful, but clear. She did not look at Hunter. She did not survey the wreckage. Her gaze extended past the seat, resting upon the small form clad in leather and denim. Her brother. A faint, ethereal smile touched her lips. Her chest rose, held for a fraction of a second, and then fell. It did not rise again. The subsequent silence was absolute. It was heavy and profound, filling the confined space until it felt akin to a cathedral. Hunter waited. He counted the seconds mentally. 1, 2, 10, 30. He gently shifted Toby's weight, careful not to awaken the boy, and reached forward. He pressed 2 fingers against Sarah's neck. Her skin felt cool, and beneath it, there was nothing. The river of life had ceased to flow. Quote. Hunter whispered into the silence. Quote. Echo rose onto the seat. The dog moved with a deliberate slowness. He stretched his neck forward and nudged Sarah's limp hand with his damp nose. He whined, a low, mournful sound that vibrated in his throat. When the hand did not respond to his touch, the dog seemed to comprehend. He did not bark. He did not panic. Echo turned away from the front seat. He looked at the sleeping boy. With a heavy sigh, the dog circled once and lay down, not in his previous position, but directly across Toby's legs. He rested his heavy head on the boy's shins, his body forming a protective barrier between the child and his sister's deceased form. It was a changing of the guard. The duty had been transferred. Sarah was gone, and the watch now belonged to the dog. Hunter observed this silent ceremony, with a lump in his throat that made swallowing difficult. He checked his watch. It was 600 hours. The sun would soon crest the ridge. The peace of the morning was shattered an hour later. It began as a low vibration within the truck's metal frame, followed by the distant, growing roar of heavy engines, snowmobiles, and something larger, likely a snowcat. Hunter knew he had to signal them before they inadvertently crushed the buried truck. He carefully extricated himself from Toby, tucking the leather jacket more snugly around the boy. Toby stirred, mumbling in his sleep, but did not awaken. Hunter unlatched the passenger door. He shoved against the compacted snow he'd created. It gave way, disintegrating outward and revealing a stark, white expanse under a pale, steel-gray sky. The frigid air flooded in, sharp and biting, instantly eradicating the warmth of their refuge. Quote. Hunter yelled, his voice hoarse. Quote. He clambered out, standing waist-deep in the drift. 50 yards distant, a rescue team clad in vivid orange suits was disembarking from their vehicles. He recognized the foremost figure instantly. It was Sheriff Jim Vance, a man built like a mountain bear, appearing distraught. Quote 2. Vance bellowed, wading through the snow. Quote. Hunter raised a hand. Quote. The relief that had washed over the sheriff's face evaporated, replaced by a wave of sorrow, yet he nodded, transitioning immediately into professional mode. He signaled the paramedics. Let us extract the child. Be delicate with the body. The rescue team advanced. The cacophony was immense. Static crackled from radios, heavy boots crunched, and orders were shouted. They pulled down the tarp Hunter had erected. The sudden influx of light and sound roused Toby. The boy sat up, blinking against the brightness. He saw unfamiliar men in bright orange suits, peering into his haven. He perceived the stark reality of the wreck devoid of the softening shadows cast by candlelight. He saw his sister, motionless and pale in the front seat, snow now settling on her hair through the open door. Toby's eyes widened. the night's trauma, held at bay by sleep and exhaustion, crashed back upon him. "We've got you, son," a paramedic stated, reaching in to grasp Toby's arms. "Come on, let us get you warm." Toby scrambled backward, kicking out. He made no sound initially, his mouth forming a silent scream. He reached for the sole anchor remaining to him. Echo snarled. The dog positioned itself between the paramedic and the boy, teeth bared, a low rumble of warning emanating from its chest. "Easy!" the paramedic shouted, retreating slightly. "Control the dog!" Another rescuer approached with a catchpole, a lengthy metal rod equipped with a loop designed to subdue agitated animals. "Get that dog out of the way so we can work," someone commanded. The appearance of the pole terrified Toby. He lunged forward, encircling Echo's neck, burying his face in the dog's fur. He then emitted a sound, a raw, ragged cry that pierced the cold morning air. It was the scream of a child who had lost everything and was about to lose the last thing that held meaning. "No, no, no!" Toby shrieked, his voice breaking. The paramedics hesitated. They were trained to preserve life, not to separate a child from his protector, but protocol mandated scene safety. "Secure the dog!" one of them ordered. Hunter had been standing beside the sheriff, providing a report on the time of death. The sound of Toby's scream caused him to spin around. He saw the catchpole. He witnessed the terror in the boy's eyes. He observed the dog preparing to confront a dozen adults to safeguard its charge. Hunter moved. He did not run, but he covered the distance with a menacing swiftness that compelled the younger men to step aside. "Back off!" Hunter roared. His tone was not that of a polite civilian. It was the authoritative command of a staff sergeant, forged on drill fields and battlegrounds. "Put that damn pole away!" The rescuers froze. Hunter positioned himself between the paramedics and the open truck door. He turned to face the cab. He was dressed in his red flannel shirt. Against the stark white landscape, surrounded by orange nylon suits, the red plaid served as a beacon of familiarity. It represented safety. It was the color Sarah had trusted. Toby looked up, tears streaming down his face, his hands clutching Echo's fur so tightly his knuckles were white, his gaze fixed on the red shirt. His screaming ceased, replaced by frantic, hyperventilating gasps. Quote 7. Hunter said, his voice lowering to a calm, resonant rumble. Quote. Hunter looked at the paramedic holding the catchpole. Quote. 9. He said quietly. Quote. 10. Quote. 11. The paramedic began. Quote. 12. Quote. 13. Hunter repeated, his eyes hard as flint. Quote 14. Sheriff Vance stepped up behind Hunter. Quote 15. Hunter turned back to Toby. He extended his hand, the rough palm open and inviting. Quote 16. Hunter said. Quote 17. Toby looked at Hunter's face, then at the red shirt, and finally at the dog. Echo licked the tears from the boy's cheek and gave his tail one slow, reassuring sweep. Slowly, Toby released his death grip on the dog's neck. He reached out and took Hunter's hand. Hunter pulled the boy from the wreck and into his arms. He lifted him effortlessly, wrapping the child's legs around his waist. Echo leaped from the truck, shaking the snow from his silver coat, and immediately resumed his position at Hunter's left side, pressing his shoulder against Hunter's leg. They walked away from the wreckage, a solemn procession of 3. The paramedics loaded Sarah's body onto a sled with respectful silence, covering her with a thermal blanket. As they walked toward the waiting snowcat, Toby rested his head on Hunter's shoulder, his eyes fixed on the red flannel collar. He reached out one small hand and gripped the fabric tightly. Hunter felt the small fist bunching up his shirt. He didn't look back at the deceased woman in the truck. He looked forward at the white expanse of the mountain. He felt the weight of the boy in his arms and the steady presence of the dog at his heel. The storm had passed. The sun was breaking over the peaks, painting the snow in hues of pink and gold. But Hunter understood that the true winter was just commencing for the boy in his embrace. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep within his bones that he would be the warmth that kept the cold at bay. The fluorescent lights of Whitefish Memorial Hospital emitted a hum at a frequency that grated on Hunter Blake's nerves. It was a sterile, artificial sound, entirely unlike the honest roar of the blizzard or the profound silence of the deep woods. Hunter stood in the corner of the pediatric observation room, feeling too large, too rugged, and too soiled for the pristine environment. He had removed his heavy, sheepskin-lined leather coat, draping it over a plastic chair. He wore his signature red and navy plaid flannel shirt, the fabric stained with mud and drying snow, its sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked by years of hard labor and combat. In the center of the room, perched on the edge of a high hospital bed, sat Toby. The boy had been scrubbed clean. The grime from the cave and the grease from the truck were gone, replaced by the scent of antiseptic soap. He wore a generic hospital gown adorned with a blue pattern. His small legs dangled from the mattress's edge, not reaching the floor. But the most unsettling aspect of Toby was not his bruises or the mild frostbite on his toes. It was his silence. Since the moment he had screamed at the crash site, Toby had not uttered a single sound. Dr. Keller, a weary-looking man with kind eyes, termed it selective mutism. It was a defense mechanism, a barrier the mind constructed when the world became too agonizing to articulate. Lying on the floor beneath the bed, disregarding the nurse's initial protests, was Echo. The silver shepherd had refused to leave the room, and Hunter had made it clear that moving the dog would necessitate forcibly removing him first. Echo lay with his chin resting on his paws, his golden eyes fixed on the door, vigilant against threats. The door opened, and the threat arrived, not in the guise of a soldier or a storm, but a middle-aged woman carrying a clipboard. Mrs. Lydia Grant from Child Protective Services was a woman who appeared to be constructed from steel wire and policy manuals. She wore a gray suit that seemed impervious to wrinkles, and her expression conveyed professional detachment. "Mr. Blake," she stated, her voice crisp, "Sheriff Vance provided me with your statement. You acted heroically today. The state is grateful." Hunter nodded once, barely acknowledging the compliment. "What will become of the boy?" Mrs. Grant glanced at Toby, her expression softening slightly before returning to her clipboard. Sarah Bennett was his legal guardian. Their parents perished in a car accident in 2021. With Sarah gone, Toby is now a ward of the state. I have arranged for transport to the youth facility in Kalispell. It is the most suitable location for him to receive the psychological evaluation he requires. Hunter felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Kalispell was 60 miles away. A facility meant doctors, white walls, and strangers. It meant the system. It meant the bureaucracy. Hunter knew the system. It was a machine that devoured broken individuals and processed paperwork. "He's not a parcel to be shipped out," Hunter growled, his voice low. "He just lost his sister this morning. You're going to put him in a car with strangers." "It is the law, Mr. Blake," Mrs. Grant replied, not unkindly. "You are not a relative. You're a bystander who found him. You have no legal standing here." The door opened again, and Sheriff Jim Vance walked in. He appeared exhausted, his uniform damp, his hat held in his hands. He carried a clear plastic evidence bag. "Actually, Lydia," Jim said, his voice heavy, "Hunter might possess more standing than you imagine, or at least the dog does." Mrs. Grant turned, raising an eyebrow. "Sheriff." Jim walked over to the bed. He looked at Toby, then at Hunter. "We finished processing the truck's cab. Found Sarah's purse jammed beneath the seat. Discovered a receipt from a breeder in Idaho dated 5 days ago. And we found this." He held up the plastic bag. Inside was a birthday card, damp and wrinkled, but legible. The front of the card depicted a cartoon superhero. Jim read the inscription on the back aloud. "Happy 6th birthday to my favorite little man. I know it has been lonely since Mom and Dad left. This is Echo. He is yours. He will keep you safe when I cannot. Love, Sarah." Hunter felt the breath catch in his throat. He looked down at the dog. Echo wasn't just a stray they had picked up. He wasn't a family pet. He was a designated guardian. He was a legacy. Jim looked at Mrs. Grant. The dog is legal property of Toby Bennett. And that dog, Jim pointed a thick finger at Echo, won't let that boy out of his sight. You try to put Toby in a state vehicle without that dog, you are going to have a problem. And you cannot put a German Shepherd in a secure youth facility. Mrs. Grant frowned, tapping her pen against the clipboard. This complicates things, but the law is clear. A dog is not a guardian. Toby needs a home. He has a home, Hunter said. The room went silent. Hunter hadn't planned to say it. The words had come out on their own, bypassing his brain and his logic. He lived alone. He liked living alone. He was too old, too damaged, too set in his ways to raise a child. But he looked at Toby. The boy was staring at him. Toby's eyes were locked under the red and navy plaid of Hunter's shirt. It was the same pattern Sarah had worn. In a world that had stripped everything away from the boy, that pattern was the only constant left. Hunter stepped forward. My cabin is 10 mi up the mountain. It is warm. It is safe. And there is plenty of room for a boy and a dog. Mrs. Grant shook her head. Mr. Blake, that is impossible. You are not a foster parent. You have not been vetted. I cannot just hand a traumatized child over to a single man living off the grid. You cannot get to Kalispell anyway, Jim interrupted. Mrs. Grant turned to the sheriff. Excuse me. The pass is closed, Lydia, Jim said. The storm dropped 4 ft of snow on the highway. The plows won't have it cleared for at least 3 days, maybe a week. You cannot get him to the facility. And the hospital needs this bed for the storm casualties coming in. Jim stepped closer to the social worker, lowering his voice. Look at the kid, Lydia. Look at him. Lydia turned to look at Toby. The boy had moved. He had slid off the bed and walked over to Hunter. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply reached out and grabbed a handful of Hunter's red flannel shirt. He buried his face in the fabric, gripping it tight. Echo moved with him, sitting down and leaning his weight against the boy legs, staring defiantly at Mrs. Grant. It was a tableau of absolute unbreakable unity. The old soldier, the broken boy, and the silver dog. Jim spoke softly. We have a provision for emergency kinship care when traditional options are unavailable due to natural disasters. Hunter is a decorated Marine veteran. I will vouch for him personally. I will check on them every day. Lydia Grant looked at the trio. She looked at the exhaustion in Toby's eyes and the fierce protectiveness in Hunter's stance. She looked at the snow pounding against the hospital window. She sighed, closing the clipboard with a snap. 30 days, she said, her voice strictly official. I can grant an emergency placement for 30 days due to weather isolation. In that time, I will process the background checks and finding a permanent placement. Hunter nodded. 30 days. Lydia pulled a form from her stack. Sign here, Mr. Blake. You are accepting temporary custody of Toby Bennett and his property, the canine known as Echo. Hunter took the pen. His hand shook slightly, not from age, but from the weight of what he was doing. He signed his name, Hunter S. Blake. Good, Lydia said. Take him home, Mr. Blake, before I change my mind. Hunter crouched down. He was now eye level with the boy. Toby, he said softly. We are leaving. Toby didn't let go of the shirt. He looked up at Hunter, his eyes searching the old man's face for any sign of rejection. Finding none, he nodded. Hunter stood up. He grabbed his heavy leather coat, but didn't put it on. He draped it over Toby's shoulders instead. The coat swallowed the small boy, the sheepskin lining hanging down to his knees. Let's go, Echo, Hunter commanded. They walked out of the hospital room. They walked past the nurse's station, past the other patients, and out the automatic doors. The cold air of the parking lot hit them, but the storm had lost its bite. The sky was clearing, revealing a brilliant, starry night over Montana. Hunter lifted Toby into the passenger seat of his old battered truck. Echo jumped in after him, curling up on the floorboard. Hunter climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater roared to life. Hunter looked over at the boy. Toby was drowning in the leather coat, clutching the birthday card Jim had given him in one hand and gripping the edge of Hunter's flannel sleeve with the other. Hunter put the truck in gear. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know how to heal a child who wouldn't speak. He didn't know how to fix the hole in his own heart that had been empty since 1983. But as he drove toward the mountains, toward the cabin that had been his fortress of solitude, Hunter realized that the silence inside the truck wasn't empty. It was full. It was the silence of a promise kept. Quote. Hunter whispered to the dark windshield. And for the first time in 20 years, he actually meant it. The cabin was exactly as Hunter Blake had left it, yet it felt entirely different. For 20 years, this structure of pine logs and stone had been a fortress of solitude, a place where the silence was a welcome guest. Now, as Hunter pushed the heavy front door open, the silence felt heavy, charged with the nervous energy of the two new occupants standing on the threshold. Hunter stepped inside and flicked the switch. The yellow light of the single overhead bulb flooded the main room, revealing the dust motes dancing in the air and the stark utilitarian nature of his life. There were no family photos on the mantel, no throw pillows on the worn leather armchair, no softness anywhere. It was the home of a man who was waiting to die, not a home prepared to help a child live. Hunter ushered Toby inside. The boy stood in the center of the room, clutching the oversized leather coat around his small frame. He looked like a refugee in a strange land, his eyes darting from the gun rack on the wall to the stacks of firewood by the stove. Echo trotted in, shaking the remaining snow from his silver coat. The dog seemed to sense the tension. He moved immediately to Toby, leaning his solid weight against the boy's leg, grounding him in the new space. Hunter cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet room. Quote. 1. Hunter said, his voice feeling clumsy. Quote. Toby did not answer. He just stared at Hunter with those wide, haunted eyes. Hunter moved to the wood stove, opening the iron door and tossing in a few pieces of seasoned kindling. He struck a match, and soon the fire was roaring, chasing the chill from the room. Quote, Trucken, Hunter said. He went to the kitchen area. His pantry was stocked for a bachelor survivalist, cans of beans, dried meat, black coffee, and flour. He rummaged through the shelves, feeling a spike of panic. What did 6-year-old boys eat? He didn't have chicken nuggets or macaroni. He found a can of peach halves in heavy syrup and a box of crackers. It would have to do. He set the food on the small wooden table. Toby sat down, moving with the stiffness of an old man rather than a child. He ate slowly, mechanically, his eyes never leaving the plate. Hunter sat opposite him, drinking black coffee, struggling to find words. He wanted to tell the boy that everything would be okay. But Hunter Blake was not a liar. He knew that for Toby, nothing would ever be truly okay again. There would just be a new normal built over the ruins of the old one. After dinner, Hunter led Toby to the spare room at the back of the cabin. It had been used for storage for decades. Hunter had hastily cleared the boxes of fishing gear off the narrow bed, dusting the mattress and laying out a clean, heavy wool blanket. "It is warm in here," Hunter said, gesturing to the room. "The chimney runs right behind this wall." Toby stood by the bed. He looked small and fragile against the rough timber walls. He took off the heavy leather coat, folding it carefully, and placing it on the chair as if it were a sacred object. Then he climbed under the wool blanket, pulling it up to his chin. Echo hopped up onto the foot of the bed, curling into a ball. Hunter started to object. He had never allowed dogs on the furniture, but the words died in his throat. The dog was the only anchor the boy had. Hunter stood in the doorway, his hand on the light switch. "Sleep tight, son," Hunter whispered. He flipped the switch, plunging the room into darkness. He stood there for a moment, listening to the boy breathing, then walked down the short hallway to his own room. Hunter lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The wind was picking up outside again, rattling the window panes. He closed his eyes, drifting into the light, uneasy sleep of a soldier who expects the perimeter to be breached. It happened 3 hours later. Hunter woke instantly. There was no transition from sleep to wakefulness. 1 second he was asleep. The next he was reaching for the knife on his nightstand, his heart hammering. A sound was coming from the spare room. It was not a scream. A scream would have been easier to handle. It was a low, keening whimper, a sound of pure, suffocating terror. It was the sound of a puppy trapped in a snare or a soldier bleeding out in the mud. Hunter threw off his covers and rushed into the hallway. He pushed open the door to Toby's room. The moonlight filtering through the window illuminated a scene of thrashing agony. Toby was tangled in the wool blanket, fighting an invisible enemy. His mouth formed a silent scream, his face wet with perspiration and tears. He struggled to draw breath, his breathing rapid and shallow, ensnared by the recurring nightmare of the crash, the biting cold, and the loss of his sister. Echo, sensing his distress, barked sharply and nudged the boy's chest with his paw, attempting to rouse him. However, the grip of the nightmare held Toby fast. Hunter hurried to the bedside. He reached out to shake the boy's shoulder, but paused, recalling the trauma training manuals. Disturbing a soldier experiencing a flashback could provoke an aggressive reaction. "Toby!" Hunter commanded, his voice firm and loud. "Stand down!" The order pierced through his panic. Toby's eyes snapped open. He jolted upright, gasping and scanning the room with a wild gaze. The terror remained evident in his eyes even when he saw Hunter standing nearby. He recoiled, pressing himself against the headboard, drawing his knees to his chest. He looked from Hunter to the shadowed corners of the room, trembling so intensely that the bed frame vibrated. Hunter stood there, feeling adrift. He yearned to embrace the boy, to reassure him that monsters weren't real. But Hunter knew the monsters were indeed real. He had witnessed them. He had laid them to rest. And now this boy had encountered them too. Words felt inadequate. Hollow phrases like, "You are safe," dissolved into the darkness. The boy felt vulnerable because the world had demonstrated its inherent danger. To suggest otherwise would be to dismiss his lived experience. Observing the trembling child, Hunter realized he couldn't be a father. He lacked the tenderness. He didn't possess the ability to comfort. But he understood guardianship. Hunter gave a single, sharp, decisive nod. He turned and departed the room wordlessly. Toby watched him leave, fresh tears welling in his eyes. He believed he had been abandoned, that his fear was too overwhelming for the old man. However, moments later, Hunter returned. He carried his military-issue sleeping bag, a robust roll of insulated nylon in a thick green hue. He also brought his preferred pillow and a heavy flashlight. Hunter did not enter the room. Instead, he placed the sleeping bag on the wooden floor of the hallway, directly across the open doorway to Toby's room. With a crisp unfolding, he unrolled the bag, plumped the pillow, and set it at the top. He then sat on the sleeping bag, leaning his back against the doorframe, facing away from the room and towards the living area, effectively blocking the entrance to Toby's room. He positioned the substantial flashlight to his right within easy reach. Echo, observing from the bed, seemed to grasp the situation instantly. The dog hopped down, padded softly across the floor, and settled beside Hunter on the sleeping bag. The silver shepherd rested its head on Hunter's thigh, its body relaxing. Hunter glanced over his shoulder, meeting the terrified boy's gaze on the bed. "I have the watch, Toby," Hunter declared. His tone was not gentle. It was the unyielding, granite-like voice of a man stating an indisputable fact. "Nothing escapes me. Not the wind, not the darkness, not the bad dreams. You sleep. I guard." Hunter lay down on the floor, crossing his arms over his chest. He gazed at the hallway ceiling, his breathing gradually settling into a steady, audible rhythm. Toby remained motionless for a considerable time. He observed the man's silhouette blocking his doorway. It was a formidable presence, unyielding and solid. The red and navy plaid of Hunter's shirt lost its color in the moonlight, but the outline of the figure remained familiar, the veteran soldier and the wolf. They formed an impervious barrier of flesh and spirit between Toby and the outside world. Gradually, the tension began to recede from Toby's small frame. He was no longer alone in the darkness. He possessed a sentry. Toby cautiously approached the edge of the bed. He peered over the footboard, able to see the rise and fall of Hunter's chest, and Echo's ears occasionally twitching, attuned to the house's settling sounds. For the first time since the vehicle plunged over the cliff, Toby felt the constricting knot of panic in his chest loosen. His safety wasn't guaranteed by a benevolent world, but by a protector capable of formidable defense against malevolent forces. Toby lay back down, pulling the woolen blanket up to his ear. His eyes remained fixed on the doorway, observing the consistent rhythm of the man on the floor. 5 minutes later, the boy's breathing synchronized with the soldiers. The nightmares lingered in the periphery, but they dared not encroach. The sentry was on duty, and the perimeter was secure. The silence within the cabin possessed a new quality. It was not the tense, vigilant quiet of the previous night, nor the peaceful stillness of a sleeping household. It was hollow. It was the silence of a vacuum, the sound of an absence. Hunter Blake deposited the armload of firewood into the bin beside the stove, the logs thudding dully against each other. He wiped the perspiration from his forehead with the back of his gloved hand. He had been outside for only 20 minutes, splitting kindling in the shed. "Toby," Hunter called out, his voice echoing slightly off the timbered walls. No response came. Hunter proceeded down the hallway, his heavy boots thudding on the floorboards. He pushed open the door to the spare room. The bed was unoccupied. The woolen blanket was disheveled but cold. Hunter felt a jolt of apprehension, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his patrols in 1983. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He checked his own bedroom. Empty. Then he noticed the back door. It was unlatched, swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze, its hinges creaking. Hunter moved to the door and pushed it fully open. He surveyed the yard. The snow in the clearing bore signs of disturbance, churned by small footprints and paw prints. However, unlike the playful tracks of a child and a dog frolicking in the yard, these tracks conveyed a distinct direction. They formed a straight line leading away from the cabin, past the wood pile, and into the dense tree line. They were heading northwest, uphill. Hunter knew precisely what lay in that direction. 2 miles up the ridge, beyond the old logging trail, was Deadman's Drop. A chilling dread settled in Hunter's stomach, heavier than any stone. The boy wasn't fleeing. He was returning to the last place he saw his sister. He was going back to the ghost. Hunter retrieved his brown leather jacket from the hook, disregarding the ache in his stiff joints. He didn't bother locking the door. He broke into a run, his long strides quickly covering the ground as he plunged into the forest. The tracking was simple, almost too simple. The snow was deep, and Toby had dragged his feet, leaving discernible furrows. Alongside the small boot prints were the large, consistent tracks of a dog. Echo was with him. That was the sole thought preventing Hunter Hart's heart from pounding out of his chest. The dog wouldn't let the boy fall. Hunter pushed himself relentlessly, his exhalations forming white clouds in the frigid air. He navigated the steep incline, his boots gripping the frozen earth. He moved through the trees like a phantom, the red and navy plaid of his flannel shirt flashing against the monochrome backdrop of the forest. It took him 40 minutes to reach the ridge. As he broke through the final line of trees, the wind struck him, carrying the scent of ozone and pine. He halted. The wreckage had been removed by the sheriff's department 2 days prior. Only the scars remained. The 2 massive pine trees that had crushed the truck were still standing. Their trunks snapped and splintered, resembling broken bones protruding from the earth. A strip of yellow police tape fluttered erratically in the wind, snagged on a branch. And there, seated in the depression in the snow where the truck cab had been, sat Toby. The boy was not wearing a coat. He sat cross-legged in the snow, clad only in his jeans and a sweater. He rocked back and forth, his arms wrapped tightly around his chest. Echo patrolled frantically around him. The silver shepherd would whine, nudge the boy's shoulder with its nose, and then circle again, its tail tucked low. The dog attempted to guide the boy away from the precipice, seeking to offer warmth, but Toby was unresponsive. Hunter slowed his approach. He wished to avoid startling the boy near the cliff's edge. He walked with deliberate, heavy steps, allowing the crunch of the snow to announce his arrival. Echo spotted him first. The dog ceased its pacing and emitted a sharp, relieved bark. It ran to Hunter, circled his legs once, then returned to Toby, as if reconnecting two ends of a broken circuit. Hunter stopped 5 feet from the boy. He could now hear Toby. The boy was emitting a sound that pierced Hunter's soul. A low, rhythmic gasping. The sound of a child who had wept until only dry, grief-stricken heaves remained. "Toby," Hunter said softly. The boy stopped rocking. He did not turn around. He stared at the empty space between the trees, the spot where his sister had drawn her last breath. "It's cold up here, son," Hunter said, taking a step closer. Toby shook his head violently. He dug his hands into the snow, scooping up handfuls of the white powder and flinging them at the empty air. He was enraged. It was a raw, impotent fury directed at the universe. Hunter sighed. He lowered himself to the ground, ignoring the cold seeping into his denim trousers. He sat down beside the boy, close enough to offer warmth but far enough to grant him space. He crossed his legs and gazed out at the gray horizon. "I know why you came back," Hunter said, his voice rough, like gravel. "You believe that by returning here, you might find something you left behind. Or perhaps you think that if you sit here long enough, you can alter what has transpired." Toby's shoulders trembled. He lowered his head, burying his face in his knees. Hunter reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a handkerchief. He didn't offer it yet. He simply held it. "I had a friend once," Hunter began, his gaze losing focus as he looked back across the decades. "His name was Danny Miller. He was 19. He possessed a throwing arm like a cannon and found amusement in all things." Hunter paused, attending to the wind's lament as it threaded through the skeletal trees. "We found ourselves in a dire predicament, an immense distance from our origins. The year was 1983. Rain was a steady downpour. I held the rank of his sergeant, entrusted with his preservation." Hunter's voice descended to a hushed tone. "And when the mortar detonated, I was a mere 10 feet away. I emerged unscathed. Danny, however, did not escape." Toby shifted his head slightly, his senses attuned. He was listening intently. "For 4 decades, Hunter continued, the weight of his words underscored by profound sorrow, "I have perpetually questioned my survival, and his demise. I harbored the belief that it was my failing. I imagined if my actions had been swifter, more astute, superior, perhaps he would be enjoying baseball in Iowa at this very moment." Hunter turned his gaze toward the boy. Toby's face was streaked with frozen tears. His lips quivered from the biting cold. "But I was mistaken, Toby. It was not my fault, nor is it yours." Toby flinched as though struck. His eyes, wide with guilt, fixed upon the vacant space where the truck had once stood. "You believe you caused her death, don't you?" Hunter inquired gently. "You feel that because you live and she does not. You have robbed her of breath. Do you think you should have remained in that vehicle?" Toby offered a slight, convulsive nod. A fresh sob escaped his chest. Hunter extended his hand, placing his large, weathered palm on the boy's shoulder. He applied a firm squeeze, a gesture of grounding. Quote 2. Hunter let out a soft whistle. Echo, who had been resting nearby, promptly rose and approached. Hunter indicated the area between them. Echo lay down, resting his substantial head upon Toby's lap. She understood her end was near, Toby, Hunter stated, gesturing toward the dog. Therefore, she ensured you would not be left alone. She expended her final moments to bestow this canine upon you. She left Echo here to be your protector. Toby gazed down at the dog. Echo looked up, his amber eyes brimming with unwavering adoration. He licked the boy's frost-nipped hand. If you reject him, Hunter continued, his voice betraying a tremor, if you persist in remaining out here in the frigid elements, attempting to perish as well, then you are squandering the ultimate endowment she bestowed. You are conveying to her that her sacrifice was in vain. Toby fixated on the dog. He caressed its silver fur. His fingers traced the line of the collar where a scrap of red flannel had been caught. Do not allow her sacrifice to be futile, Hunter implored in a whisper. You must persist. That is your mandate now. You shall live for both of you. The dam of his composure burst. Toby's face contorted. The stoic facade he had maintained since the accident dissolved into countless fragments. He emitted a profound wail that reverberated against the canyon walls, a sound of unadulterated, raw anguish. He lunged toward Hunter. Hunter opened his arms, embracing the boy. He drew Toby close to his chest, enveloping the small, trembling form in the confines of a brown leather jacket. He held him securely, resting his chin atop the boy's head, gently swaying him back and forth as the child wept. Hunter felt his red flannel shirt become saturated with tears. He closed his eyes, allowing his own tears to flow, at last. 40 years of sorrow for Danny Miller mingled with the fresh grief of this young boy. They remained thus for an extended period, the veteran soldier and the shattered child, huddled together on the precipice of the chasm. Echo pressed his body against their backs, a warm, living bulwark against the wind's assault. Eventually, the sobs subsided into intermittent gasps. Toby drew back slightly, dabbing his nose with his sleeve. He looked up at Hunter. His eyes were red and swollen, but the vacant, haunted expression had vanished. He glanced at Echo, then back at Hunter. He inhaled deeply, his breath catching. Quote Wam. Toby murmured. His voice was hoarse and faint, akin to a door long shut, yet the words were discernible. Hunter offered a smile, a tender, genuine expression that etched creases around his eyes. Quote 2. Hunter replied, gently brushing the hair from the boy's eyes. I do, and you always will, but she is not truly gone, not as long as you hold her memory. Hunter rose, his joints protesting with audible pops. He reached down, helping Toby to his feet. He brushed the snow from the boy's trousers. Quote 4, Hunter instructed. Quote 5. Toby regarded the dog. Echo responded with a wag of his tail and a soft bark. Toby nodded. He reached out and took Hunter's hand. His grip was firm, the grasp of a survivor. They turned their backs towards Dead Men's Drop. They proceeded back toward the tree line, leaving the spectral entities behind. The wind swept across the ridge, obliterating their tracks, yet the path forward remained unobstructed. The winter of 2024 had proven protracted and unyielding, its icy tendrils firmly gripping the Montana Rockies. Yet even the most severe seasons eventually recede. The sun had made its return, ascending higher in the sky each day, transforming the snowdrifts into surging waterways and coaxing vibrant purple wildflowers from the thawed soil. Hunter Blake stood on the front steps of the Kalispell County Courthouse, inhaling deeply the crisp spring atmosphere. It carried the scent of damp pavement and burgeoning pine. He appeared transformed from the man who had emerged from the blizzard a year prior. He still donned his characteristic red and navy plaid flannel shirt, unbuttoned over a gray t-shirt, and his worn work boots remained the same. However, the lines around his eyes now resembled laugh lines more than fissures in granite. The pervasive gloom that had shadowed his countenance for 40 years had dissipated. The heavy oak doors behind him swung open, and Toby erupted into the sunlight. "We accomplished it," Toby exclaimed, his voice clear and resonant, devoid of any trace of the silence that had once ensnared him. The boy, now 7 years old, was taller, his cheeks flushed with robust health and exhilaration. He clutched a document in his hand, waving it like a banner of triumph. It was a court order, bearing the official seal of the state of Montana, decreeing the permanent adoption of Toby Bennett by Hunter S. Blake. Trailing the boy, Echo emerged with an air of regal composure. The German shepherd had reached full maturity, a magnificent creature weighing 90 pounds. His silver sable coat shimmered resplendently in the sunlight, thick and lustrous. He moved with a fluid, powerful grace, his muscles rippling beneath the dense fur. He no longer bounded like a puppy. He patrolled. He halted at the summit of the stairs, surveying the parking lot with sharp amber eyes, before looking up at Hunter and bestowing a slow, contented wag of his tail. "Let's journey home, Dad," Toby declared, taking Hunter's hand. The appellation. Quote, 2. Still felt novel, a curious and marvelous weight settling in Hunter's chest. He squeezed the boy's hand. Quote, Hunter stated placidly. Quote. They entered Hunter's truck. It was the same familiar pickup, though the fender's dent had been repaired, and the passenger seat was now adorned with a generous coating of dog hair. They departed the city, navigating the winding mountain roads. The snow had receded from the asphalt, leaving the blacktop pristine and dry. They turned into the small cemetery, situated on the outskirts of Whitefish. It was a tranquil locale, nestled in a valley overlooking the mountain peaks. Hunter parked the truck, and they disembarked. The ground felt soft and yielding, saturated from the spring thaw. They proceeded past the rows of granite markers until they reached a recent interment near the forest's edge. The headstone was a simple gray slab, meticulously carved. Sarah Bennett, beloved sister, guardian. Hunter stepped back, allowing Toby to approach the grave unaccompanied. Echo accompanied the boy, pressing his shoulder against Toby's leg, mirroring the comforting gesture from their first night in the hospital. The dog settled beside the headstone, crossing its front paws, standing in silent vigil. Toby knelt on the grass. He placed the court document upon the grave, anchoring it with a smooth river stone to prevent the wind from displacing it. "Hey, Sarah," Toby began, his voice conversational and light. "The judge said, 'Yes, it's official. Hunter is my dad now.' And Lydia said, 'I don't have to go anywhere.'" Toby reached out, his fingers tracing the carved letters of her name. "I've joined the baseball team," Toby continued. "Dad says I have a throwing arm like a cannon, just like your friend Danny used to have, and Echo is enormous. You should see him. He terrifies the mailman, but he's a good dog." Hunter observed them from a short distance. The sun warmed his face, yet a different sensation, a pervasive warmth, spread through his chest. For 2 decades, Hunter had sought refuge in these mountains. He had constructed a cabin to isolate himself from the world. He had convinced himself of his own perilous nature, a damaged weapon requiring confinement to ensure the safety of others. He had spent his days anticipating their conclusion, haunted by the specter of Danny Miller, believing his failure in 1983 defined his entire existence. He looked at Toby, a boy who laughed, played, and possessed a future. He looked at Echo, a canine who had elevated loyalty to a creed. Hunter had perceived himself as the rescuer on that tempestuous night a year ago. He had considered himself the strong one, the soldier descending into the inferno to save the vulnerable. He now recognized the profound inaccuracy of that perception. He had not saved them. Not truly. He had merely extricated them from the snow. It was they who had breached the fortress of his heart. Toby's desperation compelled Hunter to discover a purpose beyond mere survival. Echo's unreserved affection taught him that allowing another person within his perimeter was permissible. They had not merely filled the vacant chambers of his cabin. They had obliterated the silence within his soul. Hunter advanced and placed a hand upon Toby's shoulder. The boy looked up, smiling. Quote, Toby inquired. Hunter gazed at the grave, then at the expansive blue Montana sky. He contemplated Sarah's dying wish, the hopeful gaze she had directed at his red flannel shirt. He recalled Danny Miller, and for the first time, the memory did not elicit a sharp twinge of guilt. It bestowed a quiet sense of peace. "She knows, son," Hunter affirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "She knows you are safe. That is all she ever desired." Echo rose and licked Hunter's hand, his tail beating a rhythm against the man's leg. The canine gazed at Hunter, his eyes conveying an ageless sagacity. "We are a pack," those eyes conveyed. "We are complete." Hunter inhaled deeply. The air was perfumed with pine resin and thawing ice, the aroma of fresh starts. "Let's go," Hunter declared, casting his gaze upon his son and his dog. "It's time to head home. I believe I pledged to instruct you in the art of the curveball before our evening meal." Toby scrambled to his feet, a wide grin on his face. "You're on!" The boy bolted, sprinting towards the truck, his laughter reverberating off the valley's inclines. Echo streaked after him, barking with delight, a flash of silver against the verdant lawn. Hunter Blake remained stationary for another brief interval. He tipped the brim of his cap in a wordless tribute to the woman resting beneath the soil. "Dismissed," he murmured. "Sarah. Mission accomplished." He pivoted and moved towards the truck, his gait long and unhesitating. He was no longer the solitary sentinel guarding a deserted stronghold. He was a father. He was the devoted owner of a loyal dog. And for the first time in an extensive period, he felt a profound sense of tranquility. We frequently navigate our lives under the assumption that fortitude stems from isolation. However, as Hunter and Echo demonstrated, genuine bravery is discovered in the readiness to embrace others. Love, ultimately, is the sole flame capable of repelling the encroaching winter. Should this narrative resonate with you, please honor the memory of guardians such as Sarah and Echo by disseminating it to a companion or offering your reflections in the commentary section below. To further delve into the profound connection shared between people and canines, kindly sign up for our family and participate in the upcoming touching journey that will be presented on your display. What steps should you take?